This is Uprising. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel right now at youtube.com/uprising with Sonali, where all of our programs are archived online. 30 years ago, the world's worst man-made industrial disaster took place in an impoverished part of India called Bhopal. A chemical factory run by Union Carbide, which is now owned by Dow Chemical, had a major spill, killing nearly 10,000 people in the immediate aftermath and another 10,000 in the years since. Dow Chemical has faced protests by Indian activists and environmentalists for years and has so far refused to take adequate responsibility. Warren Anderson, the CEO of Union Carbide, who was a wanted man in India for his role in the Bhopal accident, died in a nursing home this past September. He was 92 years old. Now, a new feature film about the events leading up to the disaster has raised questions of culpability once more. Featuring Martin Sheen as Warren Anderson and my guest Kal Penn as an Indian journalist eager to reveal the truth, the film Bhopal, A Prayer for Rain, is opening in theaters around the nation. Kal Penn now joins me in studio, and also with me is the film's director, Ravi Kumar. Welcome to Uprising.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much for joining us. Well, the film is an incredible film, and as someone who's actually talked to, on this program, survivors of the Bhopal incident, it's amazing to sort of see the incidents fictionalized. Yes. And I want to start, Ravi, with you. You chose to depict the events leading up to the disaster in this film, rather than the aftermath, rather than starting with the disaster. Why did you make that choice?
It's a very important question, Sonali. If you talk to Bhopali people, the survivors, they describe the disaster in two parts. First one is the night of the disaster, and the second is the ongoing injustice. We decided to keep our focus on the first part of the disaster, which is more dramatic to show the people, and also the lessons can be learned. And it's because the second part is actually very good material for a documentary, and excellent documentaries have been made. And the first disaster part itself has got template for the disaster, which is eerily familiar to the British Petroleum Exxon Valdez. We can learn something from it. We decided concentrating on the first part.
So Kal Penn, what brought you to this project? A bit of a departure from the things that you're best known for. Of course, people know you most from your franchise, the Harold and Kumar franchise, but they also know you from The Namesake, which is one of my favorite films, by the way. What brought you to this project?
So, I enjoy the fact that I've gotten to do these broad comedies, and I love playing those characters, but I wanted to also mix it up a little bit and do something a little more serious. The reason that I wanted to do the film, Ravi actually emailed me the script probably 5 years ago now, and I knew of course, about the real life incidents around the Union Carbide disaster, but I was really impressed at the depth with which Ravi approached the story. So really fascinating, touching on everything from Indian government corruption to corporate greed to the real life human rights consequences of what happened. I thought I was expecting when I started reading the script that it would be through a singular lens, and it wasn't. It was really multifaceted. So then I sat down with Ravi and heard the passion with which he speaks about this, as you just heard, and I said this is something I'd like to be part of. And of course, Martin Sheen being attached didn't hurt either. I was a big fan before that, but really I think having the chance to do something that is a fictionalized adaptation of a story that I thought was important to tell was the biggest reason.
Right. And so, Ravi, speaking of Martin Sheen, the character of Warren Anderson, of course, the character of played by Martin Sheen, is a very important character. He was a wanted man in India. He was clearly culpable, but still he was a human being, and you portrayed him as a human being. And I'm wondering if you can explain the choices that were made by you as a director in your multifaceted portrayal of this person who is easily demonized if you don't examine him as a human being.
I think we didn't want to patronize our audience by giving our version of events. I think we wanted to show his flaws and capabilities and everything, and let audience decide and have a healthy debate afterwards. I think we find after watching the film, people find talking to themselves, each other, what happened, how did it happen? That was our idea. By demonizing him, we would have cut off a lot of audience, intelligent audience. They want to make up their mind themselves rather than filmmakers telling them. That would be easiest route. But it was very difficult because, as you know, I'm Indian, and in India it's very hot topic, and you have to be very careful. But I'm pleased that even Indian audience, they actually not like is the word I would use, but they believe in this character and this story itself.
He's believable.
He's believable, and then he did a wrong thing. Because, for example, Carl would know, last week we had a screening where Mr. Anderson's friend, the daughter, came to the screening, and she was in tears watching the film because she thought, she expected us to demonize him, make him, bit Hitler or something. But she was very impressed not the word, but she was quite thankful and gracious about it. So I think we managed to, it's very hard, manage to please, not please, but convince everyone.
Well, I think you touched on something. So, having Mr. Anderson's friend's daughter in the audience, basically goddaughter, if I'm not mistaken, that sort of relationship, she seemed really affected by it because, yes, the character wasn't demonized, but by not demonizing a particular character, I think she felt like since it's so multifaceted, it affected her more than it would have. Demonized characters are very easy to distance ourselves from, and I think what Ravi did smartly, and obviously Martin did, was to craft a well-rounded portrayal of how painful certain things are because you see somebody caring about children, and then the next thing you know, they've made this terrible decision that might lead to, 10,000 people being killed. Very, very complex to wrap your head around, and it seemed like that's what resonated.
It's harder to dismiss that then, and maybe more conducive to actually taking some action. I want to talk a little bit about the role, Kal, that you play, and I want to play for our audience a clip from the film Bhopal, A Prayer for Rain, where we have a brief initial meeting between the character that you play and an American journalist played by Mischa Barton.
You get to pick your headlines and your enemies.
Enemies are like my headlines. Big, relevant, and rude.
So why did they choose Bhopal?
Middle of nowhere and middle of everywhere. Bhopal is at the heart of India. Cheap government land, subsidized water and electricity, railway connections. Simple logistics.
So what do you want from me?
I want an interview. Anderson, the chairman of Carbide, is coming for his free lunch with local politicians. Jobs means votes. They're all milking this cash cow together.
And that's an excerpt from the film Bhopal, A Prayer for Rain. Kal Penn, you play the role of this journalist, this Indian journalist, and your character is not just driven by getting the story. There's a personal connection for this character as well. Tell us about what it was like to play this role, aside from the mustache and the 80s clothing.
I was hoping you were going to mention that.
I like the shirt, by the way, for our listening audience. They can watch it on our
You had to watch his reaction when he saw his costume and jewelry and white shoes, which rarely see and white. His expression was priceless.
Yeah, I didn't know how he was going to dress before we started.
Right.
But what drew me to the character was this is a guy who's loosely based on a real journalist in Bhopal, a guy named Keswani. Certainly, we've taken some fictional liberties, but he's a really larger than life character. He's really, really broad, very gregarious when the movie starts out, and it seems like he's just interested in selling his newspapers. He's a gossip columnist in Bhopal. Over the course of the film, you realize that he does a real bit of investigative journalism and finds out that this plant is at risk of leaking. Tries to warn people about it, and you realize because of the lack of trust, given his background in gossip columns, nobody believes him. But you kind of slowly realize this really gregarious guy is actually pretty tragic. In the sense that he cares very deeply for his community. Nobody seems to believe him, and he's kind of caught in this really complicated, crazy relationship between the people that he cares about and realizing that they don't necessarily care about him in that same way. And then he just sort of disappears. I mean, he tries to warn people. He rides his scooter kind of off into the night. He survived that night in terms of the real guy. And Ravi knows more about the real guy. But that is one of the things that appealed to me is the fact that you have this seemingly broad character who gets whittled down into to trying to warn people and not succeed.
I think he's a very educated person, very educated. He's got degrees in journalism and philosophy. But the depth is basically he's trying to portray, being sound very ridiculous, which is, I think, for me, it was very good way to portray him.
What was it like, Ravi, to film this movie about an issue that is so emotional? How did the filming itself shed light on an issue that is still ongoing? The story just began the night that the accident happened. The story has not ended because just as many people died from the aftermath, the horrific disabilities, the chemical exposure that has been passed down from generation to generation. Children who weren't even alive when the disaster took place are suffering the consequences of Union Carbide.
I mean, the filming itself was quite emotional experience for us, all of us, especially the actors in front of the camera, because they had to portray. In one scene, for example, in the climax, when we were shooting, the actors had to pretend that they were blinded by the gas and then leaving their loved ones behind and fumbling around the dark. And they could wash their face and, have a cup of tea, but, in real life, we realized that that was happening that night. So it was quite traumatic, not traumatic, very emotional thing for us. And we had to be very careful. We had moral obligation, responsibility to be true to the characters, events, and historical facts. So it was very thin edge we had to play around. And that's why filming took longer and editing took longer, because we had to take everyone's opinion, including the survivors groups, victims, politics.
So you consulted with
Of course,
activist
of
groups?
course, from the beginning, yes. All the facts are correct. Especially the functioning, and being myself a doctor, the forensic evidence. And I went to the hospital, look at the specimen, looking at the pulmonary edema, all these side effects of everything. So we had to be true, because we know we'll be judged for years to come. It took longer, it was an emotional journey, and I won't recommend, because it just takes hard and long. We could have easily make a comedy, as have fun.
Well, nothing worth doing is ever easy or necessarily
but
fun,
you fall in
right?
love with something and you have
Right.
to finish. There's no rationale behind it. You just follow your heart.
Kal Penn, how has this movie changed you? And I know several other actors, some of them have even written about how this movie has personally impacted them. Can you share your experience?
Sure. Yeah. There are different ways. I think certainly the material, right? I think a lot of us relied very heavily on Ravi's research, since he was much more familiar than the actors were. But through that research, really having a chance to meet survivors, particularly in screenings that we've done in New York and here in Los Angeles. So it does impact you. It's a very different movie than some of the other things that I've had the chance to do. It's based on real events. It's fictionalized, but we shot this movie 5 years ago, and I have thought about it often, especially when we see things like the BP disaster, happen in the Gulf, and realize, wow, these things do keep happening. On the flip side, there are, in terms of regulations, we've talked in a couple of screenings. You never know which ones have been prevented because of better oversight, right? So it's a very hard thing to kind of analyze, but it definitely affects you as an actor if you do a film like this. But then on kind of a positive side, also shooting. This is the first film I've shot entirely in India. I'd never been to Hyderabad, where we shot the majority of it, so having a chance to meet really young emerging filmmakers in a country like India was very exciting.
Did you have to brush up on your Hindi?
So the biggest thing I probably
He lied
learned,
to us.
these guys lied to me. When I read the script, it was in English. When I rehearsed, it was in English. Rehearsing in LA on my own, I show up in India to start shooting this project, and I do the first reading of the first scene, and the director looks at me and he goes, okay, abhi Hindi mein, which means, okay, now do it in Hindi. I'm like, well, I don't speak Hindi. I speak English as my first language. I speak Gujarati fluently, but I don't speak Hindi. And sure, Hindi and Gujarati are maybe like Spanish and Portuguese, but that's still a big difference. So I had to. They were very kind to hire a dialect coach and teach me how to.
Imagine it was
Hindi.
hot, sweaty on the set with like a lot of cameras and lights, and he was stuck in this polyester shirt, sweating
Polyester,
with jewelry.
yeah.
And the mustache and all this makeup. He was sweating and he was looking at me. I'm stuck in a very bad Bollywood film.
So
Thanks for trusting. Martin Sheen, he came all the way. I'm a first-time director. They trusted the script. I think that's what drew them to India,
Right.
and with me, first-time director.
So Martin Sheen, Kal Penn, Mischa Barton, an amazing cast, and of course the Indian actors, among them Tanisha Chatterjee and others, who really bring a gravitas to this film. And I'm wondering, let's talk a little bit about what your intention for this film is, because ultimately, what this film to me showed was how you see essentially profits being put over people's well-beings, and the one and only goal of a corporation is to make a profit. They're bound legally to make a profit. The only thing standing in the way of that is government regulation. The only thing that protects people, workers and residents, is our government stepping in to say, no, you can't cut corners. No, you can't stop spending money on the freon that's required to cool your chemical factory so that if there's a leak, etc. Is this ultimately a story about that? Because you mentioned earlier Exxon Valdez and BP. This sort of stuff keeps happening, and it could happen in India again.
No, I think, first of all, I must emphasize, we are not anti-corporation themselves, because they are fabric of society. You know, they make money, but they also advance science.
They have to be held back, though.
They held back responsible. What happened in early 80s in India was post-colonial times. When the white people, Caucasian people come and make a factory, we didn't ask many questions. I think accountability was the issue, and corporate governance. They don't go out corporate that, okay, we are going to kill people.
Sure.
I think the accountability was lack, and politicians didn't ask questions because they were subservient.
So are they asking questions?
I think we should ask
today?
questions. Yeah,
Right.
that's the whole point. That's why we made this film. We should ask them questions, hold them accountable to the subject. It's not that they are doing bad things. They need to. Even the democracy has opposition for the same reason. Opposition is there to ask questions, so it's guided properly. It's like every car has to have a brake.
Right.
So accountability is more important.
Right.
And corporate, we are not against corporate. We are not saying corporate actually did bad things. We are as fault as they are. We did ask questions.
Right. A combination of government oversight and regulation with a corporation doing business can protect everybody.
Yeah.
So the question of who is holding corporations accountable in India today, we still have companies like Coca-Cola, and of course, no one's really compensated people enough. And I'm wondering if either of you have an opinion on our new government here in our new government in India. I forget sometimes I'm in the United States. My own Indian background reminds me that. But Kal Penn, your fellow Gujarati now
Exactly. Ask him.
Is in power in India.
Yes.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who seems eager, like his predecessors, to roll out the welcome mat to corporations and foreign investors. And I'm wondering if you were at the rock concert that he held at Madison Square Garden in New York earlier this year. But is there any indication that he's going to hold corporations like Dow Chemical, which owns Union Carbide, accountable?
We hope so, because I think the change, we can see the change happening right now, especially with Amnesty International lobbying Mr. Modi, Bhopal medical appeal, and they have been doing groundwork for the last 30 years. And I think government is making, I think there's a plan in the air that clean up the place and remove the factory from Bhopal ground itself.
Right.
So there's a change. And also I've been told there's been safety precautions in place for Bhopal, to avoid Bhopal from happening again.
Right, right. And Kal Penn, as a former White House staffer, I'm wondering if you can pull your strings with the president as well to make this a priority, because of course, who is looking out for poor Indians, right? Who is looking out for those people who are poor in Bhopal? And I'm wondering, finally, last thoughts for both of you. What do you hope most to come out of this film here in the United States? Union Carbide, Dow Chemical, these are American companies. I mean, they're multinationals, but they do business here in the United States, and we have power as consumers and as government, as citizens and as taxpayers. What's your hope for the film?
I'm glad you brought that up. You know, in a lot of the discussions after the film, you know, I think Ravi smartly, as I mentioned before, really focuses on certainly the corporate greed aspect, but the government corruption and personal corruption that still exists in India. I mean, we shot this film in India. We've been to India to promote it. You can't go to India for business without seeing vast corruption happen everywhere. So when you're looking at, you know, sort of government corruption accountability on both the corporate side, humanitarian side, it is a really broad picture that I think Ravi's done a great job at painting in the film. You know, we had some screenings. We opened in New York last week. We opened in Los Angeles tonight. And the audiences, particularly American audiences, seem to be walking away from the movie with anger a lot of times, saying we had no idea that this was really based on real life events. You know, how can situations like this keep happening? And then get into really passionate conversations about the role of the individual in you know, either acquiescing to things like corruption or lack of regulation, who we vote for, of course, the debate between major parties and third parties, and what's most effective in holding both individuals and governments and corporate entities accountable.
So it's starting
Fascinating
the conversation. There we go,
Yes,
and there
absolutely.
you've accomplished your goal. We will post to our website, uprisingwithsonali.com, where you can watch the film. There are going to be screenings attended by my guests and Martin Sheen. This is Uprising. Bipasha Shom is our producer and program director. Michael Casey is our research intern. Christian Beck and Camila Ramirez are our production interns. And Dan Swerdlove is our technical director. Teddy Robinson and Jonathan Alexander are our audio engineers. Special thanks to Anna Buss for help with our YouTube channel, which you can find online at youtube.com/uprisingwithsonali. Our website is simply uprisingwithsonali.com. Our theme music is by Quetzal. I'm Sonali Kolhatkar, host and executive producer of Uprising. Have a wonderful weekend. I'll see you Monday.